To quote the United Nations 75th anniversary webpage, and I quote, "The United Nations is marking its 75th anniversary at the time of great disruption for the world, compounded by an unprecedented global health crisis with severe economic and social impacts. We will emerge stronger and better equipped to work together, or will distrust and isolation grow further. 2020 must be a year of dialogue when we come together to discuss our priorities as a human family and how we can build a better future for all," unquote. This week, several of us participated in flag raising ceremonies throughout the county, in Hastings, the county offices in White Plains, Mount Vernon, and New Rochelle, to mark the United Nations 75th anniversary. Hopefully, others will join us next year to signify us coming together as a world and as a community. Today's theme is Sustainable Development Goals 16, Peace, Justice, and Strong Institutions. Please Google Sustainable Development Goals for the United Nations to give you more of the 17 total goals. Without these, the better future will never come. Looking into 2021, after what we have been through in 2020, we must diligently and collectively partner, collaborate with each other. The first step is to become a member of the United Nations Association, if you have not already done so. The only prerequisite is being a humanitarian. Being here today is a great first step. We welcome all voices and participants into our United Nations USA Association. Thank you to the panelists and contributors of today's event. Participants are welcome to write questions and comments in the chat function. At the end of the program, we will have an optional discussion session when the panelists will respond to questions. Please note that the session will be recorded as well. Now, I'd like to turn this over to Daniel Benner. Dan is an instrumental and inspirational addition to our board. If you haven't done so already, please take the time to read Dan's latest written piece of CEDAW, that is the Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, on our website. It's phenomenal. Dan, thank you for all you do, and welcome.
Thank you so much, President Edwards, and thanks to everyone that's part of this call. President Edwards mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, so I have 4 minutes in which to talk to you about probably and arguably one of the most important campaigns of all of our lifetimes, which is the SDGs. I wanted to step back for a second, though, and just a note about the UN. If your last impression or touch point of the UN was 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, I urge you to go to un.org today, right after this session, and learn more about what they're doing, because, my friends, it is a different UN. It is remarkably collaborative. It is remarkably inclusive. And in fact, one of the best examples of that inclusion are the SDGs. Next slide. Next slide. There are 17 goals and there are 169 indicators, and I defy you to not find something on the slide that you care about. There is something literally for everyone in these goals. It's about prosperity, it's about peace, it's about environmental sustainability, it's about gender equity, food security, everything and anything that you care about is embodied in the goals. Next. Today, we are going to be addressing really some of the cross-cutting goals. So while our focus is on 16, which is peace and justice and strong institutions, you'll see through our speakers that we're addressing multiple goals. Some are about environment, some about education, some about food. So it's really important to understand that the SDGs do not sit alone. They are cross-cutting, they are interconnected, and they are, quite frankly, the way the world is going to benefit and move forward over the next decade. Next slide, please. When I talk about moving forward, there's a little bit of bad news, and the bad news can also be an opportunity. The bad news is what you see here on this slide. This is the result of a recent report from the UN Secretary General. And unfortunately, the Secretary General is noting that the advancement of the SDGs is not moving with the speed required. There's just not enough activity to be able to reach these goals in the next 10 years. So what are we going to do about that? Everyone can play a part. Next slide. It's very obvious that the UN needs help. The Secretary General, all of the organs of the UN are very transparent and very candid about that. No single organization, no intergovernment organization, not even the UN, can meet these goals on their own. They need everyone. They need the private sector, academics, NGOs, governments, and even more importantly, on some levels, they need you. Next slide. Every single person on this call can do something to advance the SDGs. Now, let me tell you, one of the things that has been kind of difficult since the SDGs were passed in 2015 was the ability to make them personal. While there's a lot of people who say, I'd love to do something to advance the SDGs, they can't quite understand how to do it. And it's understandable because they're pretty complicated when you read these 17 goals on the UN website. But last year, there's good news. The SDGs were hacked. They were hacked with the full support of the UN, and they were made into something called the Good Life Goals, which map entirely to the SDGs, but they're individualized and they're personal. So we can see those on the next slide. And you can see just a comparison. The SDG language and the Good Life Goal language are two very different worlds, and both of them are needed. The SDGs are needed for people that are extremely embroiled in the content of the SDGs. The Good Life Goals are needed for individuals like you, like every single one of you, to help advance these goals. And I said early on that we were focusing today on SDG 16. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see what SDG 16 is all about. It's peace, justice, and strong institutions. Well, if you read this, which is SDG 16, it's pretty complicated. Promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all. And I won't finish reading it, but you can see that it's a mouthful. That's the SDG. Now, next slide. And then one more. This is the comparable Good Life Goal. So it's exactly the same goal. It's the same objective. This is much easier for an individual to understand. Make peace. How much simpler can it get, right? And when you read these 5 points, learn about and use your rights. Be kind and tolerant. Resist corruption and abuse of power. Support the institutions that support people. Stand up for fairness and peace. And if it sounds like these are values, they are. And that's what the world needs. And that's what the SDGs are based on. Values and human rights. The next slide. The future we want, in closing, is up to every single one of us. Don't leave it to the governments. Don't leave it to any individual organization. Take responsibility, take ownership, and be part of this. Go to goodlifegoals.org and do your part. Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the Vice President of our chapter, Marcia Brewster.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you all for participating today. We're delighted to have you here for our 75th anniversary of the United Nations with the theme Past, Present, and Progress. And I am delighted to begin the segment on the past, and I am going to introduce my friend and colleague, Kristen Timothy. We work together at both the regional UN offices for Asia and the Pacific in Bangkok, and also at the Department of Economic and Social Affairs in New York. Kristen was the Deputy Director of the Division for the Advancement of Women before UN Women was created, and she was the coordinator of the Fourth World Conference on Women held in Beijing in 1995. Take it away, Kristen.
Thank you very much, Marcia. It's a pleasure to be here to speak about the past with a focus on the UN's work for women and girls. As I was thinking about what I wanted to say today, I realized that the UN is almost as old as I am. During our lifetime, so far, we have seen incredible progress for women and girls in many parts of the world. But empowerment of women and girls and protection of their human rights, in the words of Secretary General Gutierrez, is still the greatest challenge of our world. In the time allotted to me, I am going to do a quick glance back at the role the UN has played in improving women's rights and status. The UN has worked to set goals and standards, and as most of you know, that's a major function of the UN. It has gathered information and statistics to let the world know about the situation of women and girls, and it has targeted women and girls in its technical assistance and aid, development aid. Most recently, the UN member states have incorporated women's rights and empowerment, as you've just heard, into the SDGs as a key element for achieving economic, political, and social progress, as well as for maintaining peace and security. I would like to begin with a glimpse back to 1945. First slide, please. And the adoption of the UN Charter and creation of the Commission on the Status of Women. The UN Charter is a marvelous document. It's kind of like the Constitution of the UN. We keep going back to it. And what's important in this context is that there were a handful of women at the Charter Conference who insisted that the language in the Charter say that the treaty would recognize fundamental human rights, including equal rights for men and women, not just for men, which would have been the standard way they would do it. And two of the women I'd like to mention who were involved in this were Dr. Bertha Lutz from Brazil and Dr. Minerva Bernardino from the Dominican Republic. You all probably know that Eleanor Roosevelt, of course, was also at the Charter Conference, but she was not so keen on setting up the Commission on the Status of Women. She wanted to see human rights embodied only in the broader human rights work of the UN. But she was overruled by a lot of feminists, many of them from Latin America, as a matter of fact, who insisted on creating a Commission on the Status of Women to monitor the status of women and agree on actions to be taken. Their first big effort was to assess the political and legal status of women worldwide. And at this time in 45, there was also a lot of work going on around women's suffrage. So the political side of women's rights was very important. Now I'd like to go to the next slide because I'm going to jump to 1970s and 1980s, two critical decades in the work of the UN on women. And they were critical in part because this was a time in the 70s when women's liberation movement was active in the United States and in Europe. And some barriers had been slowly going down with women's participation in the UN and other male-dominated international institutions. In fact, in 1972, the UN finally appointed a woman to a high-level position. Her name was Helvi Sipilä. She was from Finland. And at the time she was appointed, 97% of men were in the senior positions at the UN. So she wasn't a token woman by any means. She was a tough lawyer, and she immediately started to work to have 1975 to 1985 established as the UN Decade for Women. And in that decade, we had 3 conferences, one in Mexico City, one in Copenhagen, and one in Nairobi. As a result of these conferences, emerged a truly international women's movement. In 1979, we adopted at the UN the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW. And this has proven to be a vital instrument for keeping member states on track to bring about important change. Next slide. Now I'd like to skip to 1990 to 2015. And here we have in 1995, the pretty well-known conference, although not everybody has heard of it, that took place at the in Beijing. It was the 4th World Conference on Women, hosted by the Chinese. 5,000 NGOs convened at Wairo for NGO meetings, and 25,000 government representatives and over 1,000 representatives of the press came to Beijing for this conference, which has proven to be incredible. It is still being the platform, the plan of action adopted by consensus, is still being used as a way to hold governments accountable for improving women's role in economic, political, and social life, and in achieving and maintaining peace. The conference also reaffirmed women's sexual rights after lengthy debate into the wee hours of the morning, I might say. Now, in 2000, the first resolution on women, peace, and security was adopted, which was a real breakthrough. And since then, there have been 10 resolutions. And I should point out that this year is also the 20th anniversary of Resolution 1325. And then in 2010, the UN created UN Women to monitor and promote rights of women worldwide. And in doing so, they absorbed UNIFEM, which is an organization that some of you may know about, which worked a lot at the field level in developing countries. Next slide, please. So we now have the Sustainable Development Goals, which have been mentioned before, and Goal 5, which is the crucial role of women in all aspects of sustainable development and peace, and calls for concerted action to overcome gender discrimination. Next slide, please. So going forward with the Sustainable Development Goals and building on all of the progress that has been made so far, we now know that gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment are integral to the international agenda, thanks to the UN, the agenda for economic, environmental, social, and political development. One of the things that still is a major problem is violence against women. Violence against women is in itself a pandemic. And I would like to note that November 25th is the International Day to eliminate violence against women. We have examples of progress that include the adoption of CEDAW in the US, one city and one state at a time. The UNA Westchester has adopted CEDAW and is trying to get New York State to do the same thing. We've had major progress worldwide in female education and in the political and legal representation by and for women, and in improving health for women and girls. Well, I would like to conclude by pointing out that the UN, and this is kind of a cautionary note, the UN's role is to set the global agenda with buy-in from all member states. But adherence and progress depends on willingness of nations and their citizens to modernize culturally, socially, economically, and politically. Women's rights, along with racism, are the unfinished business of our time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. That was wonderful. Thank you. I'm delighted to introduce my friend and fellow New Rochelle resident, Ambassador Francis Okelo. Ambassador Okelo was born in Uganda and has had a distinguished career serving the United Nations in countries around the world. He served as Deputy United Nations Special Coordinator for the Middle East process and as the Secretary General's Special Envoy to Sierra Leone and Afghanistan. Prior to his positions at the UN, he served as Uganda's ambassador to several European countries and later to Kenya. Ambassador, thank you.
Thank you very much, President Yana and Colleen, for that introduction. Let me begin by saying that I've been a resident of New Rochelle for almost 50 years off and on. And I've not engaged with the UNA Association, Westchester chapter, as actively as I should have wanted. And so my acceptance to speak on this event is really an act of atonement for the neglect that I've had over the years. So I'll try to correct that. I think the chapter needs all the support that it can get. Let me begin by requesting you to do just a little exercise. If you close your eyes for a few minutes and gather your thoughts and perhaps jot down these thoughts on a piece of paper and then ask yourself some of these basic questions. What does global peace look like to you? And is the world today as peaceful as you would like it to be? What about the situation of justice and injustice in the world today? You see, this is the kind of questions that the nations of the world asked at the end of World War I or II. And their collective answer or response to these questions and their resolve to prevent the world from another global conflict led to the creation of a world body that would be specifically focusing on the promotion of international peace and security, advancement of economic and social development, foster understanding among the nations of the world. And that body is the United Nations, which whose anniversary, 75th anniversary we are celebrating today. Now, since its inception, the UN has been engaged in practically every aspect of human endeavor in science and technology, in health and agriculture, and assistance to refugees, feeding the hungry, as the WFP has been doing and has been recognized by a Nobel Peace Prize this year. And the UN now is involved with the problems of the pandemic. But impressive as these pursuits and achievements are, the UN continues to stand on a shaky ground as the world is rocked either and thither by wars and conflicts, conflicts between nations, conflict within nations, conflicts in communities, and on and on and on. You just have to tune in the news and you hear troubles in one spot or another. Now, how can we reduce or eliminate these conflicts? Traditionally, there have been three ways of doing that. One is the so-called might is right, where the stronger partner subdues the weaker and brings the hostilities to an end. Not very fair. Another one is when there is a balance of conflict between the two sides and no clear win emerges. This is no solution either. The problem is simply dormant and it can reemerge at a later date in the future. The best solution is when a conflict is resolved through negotiations and through understanding and through mutual appreciation. But however, in order to ensure that there is a sustained end to these hostilities, it's absolutely essential that the terms of the agreement of the ceasefire are fully observed and complied with by the parties to the conflict. How do you ensure that? Well, a neutral observer or party would therefore need to be put in place to monitor full compliance by the parties to the conflict and report immediately any violations and address those violations. Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly what the UN peacekeeping operation is all about. Case in point, the 1948 bitter war between Israel and the Arab neighbors ended when an armistice was arranged and agreed to by the parties to the conflict. But it was absolutely necessary to ensure that the terms of the armistice were fully observed and complied with by the parties. At that time, the much respected Prime Minister of Canada, Lester Pearson, proposed a brilliant idea of creating a UN military force to undertake the task of monitoring compliance with the terms of the armistice. The proposal was widely accepted by many members and the Security Council, and a UN mission formerly known as the UN Truce Supervision Organization was sent to the Middle East to undertake the responsibility of monitoring the armistice. The mission has been there ever since, over 70 years. Meanwhile, Lester Pearson, of course, was awarded in 1957 with a Nobel Peace Prize for originating this idea and for the success of the peacekeeping operations. Now, after that, the UN sent in a military observer group to monitor the compliance of a ceasefire agreement by India and Pakistan. The two countries had been fighting 3 wars over the control of Kashmir. And that peacekeeping mission is still there to this day. In 1956, the UN peacekeeping mission was mounted to address a similar crisis in the Suez Canal. It was the first UN emergency force to be put in place. This was soon followed by a UN operation in the Congo, which was launched in 1960 to address the post-independence civil war in that country. This was a large-scale mission by the UN. It was nearly 20,000 personnel at its highest peak. And it also turned out to be very dangerous and very risky, as the UN lost over 250 of its staff, including, very sadly, the death of a UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld in a plane crash on a visit to that region. Now, since the 60s to this day, there has been many UN peacekeeping missions of various description and durations and purposes. Today, there are 14 active UN peace missions in various travel spots around the world, with more than 110,000 personnel, with a combined budget of a little over $7 billion, which is just about 0.5% of the world's total annual military expenditure. Now, peacekeeping is just that, keeping the peace. UN does not impose or enforce peace. A UN mission under the UN peacekeeping mission under the Charter is only authorized by the UN Security Council. It is a neutral force. It does not engage in conflict unless in self-defense. And its dispatch to a conflict area is subject to the acceptance by the parties to the conflict. Now, over the years, and in response to the constantly changing environment of peacekeeping operations, the composition of a UN peacekeeping mission has been more varied and complex. While the military remains the backbone of the component of a mission, a typical UN mission today includes many phases. It has administrators, it has development planning experts, a police contingent perhaps, a team of legal advisors, deminers, electoral observers, human rights observers and advisors, etc., humanitarian, public relations, and as many experts as are deemed necessary for that particular mission. A mission is normally headed by a special envoy of the Secretary General, who is appointed by the Secretary General and must be approved by the Security Council. And he or she reports directly to the Secretary General and through him to the Security Council. The deputy mission is usually as chief of the military component of the peacekeeping mission. And the mandate of a UN peacekeeping mission is given by the Security Council directly, usually in a form of a resolution. The Secretary General, of course, provides the necessary instructions regarding code of conduct and the rules of engagement for the military. Now, let me note here in passing that despite the inevitable risks and dangers inherent in the nature of the beast, a UN peacekeeping service is an immensely rewarding and satisfying experience. I can personally vouch to that. As said earlier, a UN peacekeeping mission have largely evolved over the years in response to advances in technology and the increasingly complex and subtle nature of modern conflicts and the attending issues and problems. Peacekeeping is no longer confined to the original concept of monitoring ceasefire and preventing resumption of hostilities. Peacekeeping today calls for more flexible, sophisticated response to deliver on the expensive and increasingly complex missions, to design and execute viable transition strategies for those missions where a degree of stability has been attained, to help build sustainable institutions of governance, monitor human rights, undertake security sector reforms or training, and in many cases engage in the disarmament, demobilizations of former fighters and their reintegration into society as useful civilian members. The Secretary General periodically reviews and assesses the state of existing peacekeeping operations with a view to improving them in the context of emerging new challenges and circumstances, just as I've described. Now, member states too will need to adjust their financial and other support for UN peacekeeping activities in the light of this situation and any recommendations that the Secretary General or the Security Council may make. The UN through its peacekeeping operations, has done an outstanding job over the years. In fact, it was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize for that, together with the Secretary General. Now, let me conclude with one thought: justice. Justice is the foundation of peace. And any conflict, be it between countries or within countries or in a community, often arises because an injustice or unfairness is perceived to exist. Now, when the nations of the world promptly rise up to address these injustices and their various implications, the groundwork for peace is laid, and peace itself is assured. And when peace reigns, then the task of keeping the peace becomes less onerous and perhaps even altogether irrelevant. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And here are some pictures of you and the Secretary General.
Yes, as I said, the special envoy is appointed by the Secretary General and reports to him directly. When I was special envoy in Sierra Leone, I had to periodically fly to New York to report to the Secretary General, and this is one of the occasions. The meeting has two parts. There's the public side where I inform him directly about the situation on the ground, Sierra Leone, and with all his staff taking notes. And then the second part is usually the longest, is a tete-a-tete when myself, the Secretary General and myself, the two of us, talk more candidly about the situation. So that's how it looks like.
Yeah, thank you. Devron, can you just scroll through the rest?
This is just to give you an idea of me and my staff. I think this was in Ivory Coast before a meeting. You see the military advisor on the side and some of my staff in the back. So just casually meeting and before the meeting starts, just to give you a flavor of what goes on the ground. Yes, just the time I was retiring, the UN has instituted a very good program, namely to have an advanced training of potential future peacekeepers from various parts of the world. The idea is that when a peacekeeping mission is being put together and the staff is being recruited, it would be useful to have those people who had already been trained in the ways of the UN, the code of conduct and rules of engagement, etc., and how to behave in a peace mission. When they've already been trained, then they join a mission and they hit the ground running. We did the first of these trainings in Brasilia in 2005, where nearly all the countries of South America were represented. It was, I think, for about a week, and I was leading that as the special representative, the Secretary General. At the end of the training, all the army chiefs from those countries came to Brasilia. Very interesting. And I had to brief them on what we did, and we took that photograph.
Mr. Ambassador, we need to move along, but thank you very much. Thank you very much. So those two excellent presentations were about the past, and we just have a very short video to show the past as relates to United Nations Association. Devron, can you cue it up?
Oh, got it. Don't.
Thank you. And that is UNA Westchester. We hope you all join us. Brenda?
Yes. A very pleasant good afternoon. It is my delight to introduce my former student, Dr. Cayetana Henderson, who was asked to present on the effects of COVID-19 on education in the United States and abroad. Dr. Henderson was called out of the country, so I would like to present what she did, in fact, leave with us. It's very significant. I have had the pleasure, she said, of working with schools and systems all over the United States and in more than 50 countries internationally. And the impact of the global pandemic has brought some really important issues in education to the forefront of local, national, and international conversation, she said. One of the most important questions the pandemic has raised is, what is the purpose of education? We watched as schools all over the world became feeding centers, community meeting places, support spaces for essential workers, temporary housing, and more, she notes, which has reminded us that schools are the center of communities and societies. We've seen the best teachers prioritize the safety and well-being of their students and communities and realize that before they can attend to students' academics, they have to attend to students' mental health, building strong relationships with their students and their families. For me, she notes, one of the biggest questions the pandemic has raised is whether or not the way we are teaching students prepares them to be the kind of self-motivated, resourceful, problem-solving individuals that times like these require. I believe that this pandemic has sustainable development goal 4 around quality education, working together to achieve the sustainable development goal. There are some important insights to glean from all of the distance learning experiments happening across the world, she notes. Obviously, the digital divide looms large in this conversation. I believe that we have a choice to make. Either we are going to make massive investments across the board in technology, and teachers for me, she notes, the two go hand in hand, or we're going to allow technology to continue to exacerbate inequality across the world. She further notes, for me, this is a leadership issue. If leaders are committed to reducing inequalities, as we've committed to with SDG 10, Sustainable Development Goal 10, then we have to reprioritize resources to focus on ensuring that students and schools have the tools they need to succeed. Blended learning is here to stay, and we need governments, local organizations, communities, and schools to work in partnership to effectively equip schools and educators for success. This idea of partnership is critical, she notes, as schools, and we know this, can't do it alone. The only way to solve this incredibly complex issue is by having everyone work on it together. Perhaps one of the most important things that has come out of this difficult time is that distance learning has reset the relationship dynamics between schools and families. We're reminded of our shared responsibility for student progress. Schools can't do it without families, and families can't do it without schools. But perhaps the largest lesson, she notes, we've learned from the pandemic is around the importance of teachers. Teachers have been the shining stars of this historical moment. going above and beyond to strengthen their relationship with students and families to provide a supportive learning environment. They have adapted and refined their roles to focus on urgent needs with whatever resources are available. Teachers all over the world are innovating and finding creative ways to keep learning happening. In many cases, she notes, without decent technology. And they are doing all of this and more without the proper preparation, training, tools, and resources. It's not enough to applaud and appreciate teachers for the way they have stepped up this moment. It is incumbent upon us all to invest in new roles, responsibilities, training, and resources to allow them to be successful. And I must note here very quickly, Marcia and members who are in attendance, that Dr. Henderson was the Chancellor of DC Public Schools and received her honorary doctorate degree from Georgetown University, of which I had an opportunity to attend. So again, this is, I would ask Nicole. Nicole, do you have any comments that you would like to make at this time?
Thank you, Brenda. My name is Nicole Butterfield. I'm a mom, an educator, and a resident of Westchester County. I work as the co-chair of the programs committee for UNA Westchester. So I've been experiencing the pandemic as a mom and as a teacher. I teach independently outside of school systems, but I have many, many friends who are experiencing the overwhelming task of keeping their classes going while raising their young children at home, and also adapting to the ever-changing landscape at school. Are we in person? Are we hybrid? Are we remote? It's been a very chaotic time for educators. It has also been a scary time. I've seen friends and loved ones lose people to COVID. I've had friends of mine who are teachers realize that they need to get their wills and their advanced directives in place in order to go back to the classrooms this fall. So it's a very emotional and stressful time for teachers as well. But the most exciting thing that I see coming out of all of this are the incredible innovations in reaching more and more students despite all the challenges and disruptions. So I wanted to share a couple of quick slides just to show you what I discovered in my most recent research. There's a wonderful gathering of international organizations that is preparing to address this issue collaboratively, which I think, as Dr. Henderson mentioned, is key. So Save Our Future is a campaign that recognizes this triple threat to education. 90% of the children have had their education disrupted in some way by the pandemic. Budgets are at risk because a lot of funding is being channeled in other directions due to the pandemic. And also, even before the pandemic, we only had about half of 10-year-olds in low and middle income countries who were able to learn how to read a simple text. Next slide. The Director General of UNESCO commented very wisely that financing education is not a cost. It is our most crucial long-term investment. And I've laid out these 7 ideals that Save Our Future, this collaboration by more than 70 countries that recently met in Paris on October 22nd with the common goal of helping this global challenge. These are the identified approaches that we can take. So reopening schools, strengthening the education workforce, not just gathering more teachers, but actually equipping them to help support students academically, as well as looking at the whole child and working for their well-being. And then providing more professional development, which can be exhausting for teachers, but is also really necessary if they're going to be able to use the technology available to them or to adapt to whatever changing plan we might have in place for dealing with school disruption. Transforming education. This is the part I'm really excited about. Finding new ways to educate people. I sometimes find myself standing in backyards right now, teaching a pod of kids, everyone with a mask, everyone with a Shakespeare script in hand. That's not what I thought I'd be doing right now, but it's actually very exciting. But those are the lucky families who can afford to have me come to their house, right? We have lots and lots of kids internationally and locally who are missing out on education, and there are many, many gaps. And the only way that we're going to help this situation is to focus on building up the education technology, making it more available, having effective and equitable sharing of digital resources. And the last 3 points are all the icons there. I put all in green because it's really just all about the money, making sure that governments, the international community get together and funnel money toward education. And improving our coordination and use of the evidence that we have, that we know where the challenges are, to making sure that children are being well cared for and well educated. So that is a very quick version, but I would look forward to speaking with anyone who's interested about these topics, because I'm very excited about what's happening here. Thank you very much. And I'll turn it back over to Brenda.
Thank you very much, Debron. Debron, would you revert back? Thank you so very much. Nicole, that was wonderful, and thank you so much. I would like to leave with you the last statement that Dr. Henderson, of whom I'm extremely proud, noted. She said, we can use the lessons of this era to reimagine and reshape the future as the SDGs challenge us to do, or we can ignore the questions being raised and the emerging examples at our own peril. The choice is ours. And then she thanked everyone for the opportunity to share. And Nicole, again, thank you so very much. It is now with great pleasure that I present our next, back Debron. Thank you, Debron, revert back. Thank you. Our next presenter, Mr. Patrick Schiarati, who is known throughout the UN system. He is a member of the board of directors of the UNA of Westchester and the Global NGO Executive Committee. And he is editor of the NGO Reporter with thousands of United Nations affiliated NGO subscribers throughout the world. Patrick, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Smith. Hello, all. I hope you can hear me. In 2012, I had lunch with Ambassador Simona Miculescu at the United Nations. During the lunch, we discussed how the arts could move diplomacy and the world, and we became working friends. By 2014, we were working on our first CD recording, which is this one, The Ambassadors Sing for Peace. During the COVID limitations that have been placed on our 75th anniversary, Ambassador Miculescu remains able to make a global artistic statement that resonates worldwide. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Hello, I am Simona Mirela Miculescu, representative of the UN Secretary General, head of UN Office Belgrade, and former ambassador of Romania to the United Nations. I am very proud and happy to invite you to watch a music video involving the participation of 26 current and former ambassadors to the United Nations who wanted to pay a tribute to all those who are healing the world today and to urge all of you to support the World Health Organization. This cover of Michael Jackson's beautiful song, Heal the World, comes after 2 music albums created with ambassadors to the UN, the first ever. One was Ambassadors Sing for Peace, performed by singing ambassadors from 5 continents. And the other one was Strong UN, Better World, released by the first ever ambassadorial music group at the UN called UN Rocks. We always had in mind what Hans Christian Andersen used to say, when words fail, music speaks. If you like what you see, please help us spread our message of gratitude and solidarity, which is also a way to honor this year's 75th anniversary of the United Nations. I truly think we can all heal the world in our own way. This is our message of hope from 26 countries.
There's a place in your heart, and I know that it is love. And this place could be much brighter than tomorrow.
And if you really try, you'll find there's no need to cry. In this place, you'll feel there's no hurt or sorrow.
There are ways to get there if you care enough for the living. Make a little space, make a better place. Heal the world, make it a better place for you and for me and the entire human race. There are people dying. If you care enough for the living, make a better place for you and for me. We could fly so high, let our spirit never die. In our hearts, let us feel that all are brothers.
Create a world without fear. Together we cry happy tears. See the nations turn their souls into plowshares.
We could really get there if you care enough for the living. Make a little space, make a better place. Heal the world, make it a better place for you and for me and the entire human race. There are people dying. If you care enough for the living, make a better place for you and for me.
And the dream we were conceived in will reveal a joyful face. And the world we once believed in will shine again in grace. Then why do we keep strangling life when this earth crucifies its soul? Though it's plain to see this world is heavenly, be God's glory.
Heal the world, make it a better place for you and for me and the entire human race. There are people dying. If you care enough for the living, make a better place for you and for me. You and for me. Heal the world we live in and for me. For our children and for you. The world we live in. Save it for our children.
You can only imagine how wonderful it was to work with these folks in the rehearsals and the recording. It was just amazing. Thank you, ambassadors. I would now like to introduce Paul Presendiu. He's a member of the UNA Westchester Board of Directors and is heading up our Young Professionals program. And he will be presenting the youth panel. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patrick. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. On top of my work in climate activism, I chair the Young Professional Program for the United Nations Association. The UNA Young Professionals Program provides members under 40 with opportunities to engage with other like-minded young adults in their community to support the mission of the United Nations. Today, we have assembled a panel of 4 outstanding young leaders in Westchester County who are addressing progress on global issues. Our first panelist is Raina Cadaville, who has been involved with UNA since she was 14 years old, currently serving on the Young Professionals Board and as the Secretary General of Westchester County's inaugural Model United Nations Conference this upcoming year. She is a CEO of a nonprofit named Urban Refuge and an analyst at MasterCard. Our second panelist is Shane Osiloye, a social and economic activist with a long-standing record of going above and beyond in communities throughout Westchester County. He's the executive director of Singularity and the president of the Urban Legacy League. Our third panelist is Harshita Shet. Harshita is an 11th grade student that has been involved with United Nations Association from the 8th grade. She wants to make a difference in the world with her project, Feminine Dignity. She is an advocate for women's and human rights. She also serves at a Young Professionals Board and also as a student member of the Town of Greenberg's Human Rights Advisory Committee. Harshita has also helped coordinate our collaboration with Feeding Westchester to collect non-perishable items in preparation for the holiday season this year. Our fourth panelist is Anusha Vaish. Anusha is a 5th grade student who has been studying insects since she was 7 years old. Rather than waiting for others to protect nature, she believes that climate begins with you through her efforts as an insect guardian. She aims to engage youth in the secret life of these little critters and leave a positive impact on our future. Now, each of our panelists will receive 3 minutes to share their work and explain how they are contributing to a better future through progress and are helping establish a better nation and a better world for all of us. Thank you. And I guess the floor is now yours, Raina.
Thank you so much, Paul, and huge thank you to UNA Westchester for putting on this amazing event. It's so exciting and a little bit surreal to be celebrating the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. When it comes to fostering peace and justice and building strong institutions, it's incredibly important that refugees and displaced peoples be part of that conversation. No one understands the need for strong institutions better than they do. In fact, when the SDGs were first developed, there was no mention of refugees or displaced people in the 17 goals. But thanks to a lot of great work by UNHCR and others, I'm happy to say that in 2019, an indicator was added under SDG 16, which we're talking about today, that focuses on refugees and aid for displaced people. But this is an example of how refugees can often be left behind by governments and institutions when it comes to peace and justice. And that's where my work comes in. I run a nonprofit called Urban Refuge, as Paul mentioned, and our goal is to make refugees self-reliant by helping them access aid resources in the new cities that they call home. We've developed an app that pinpoints and organizes aid resources into categories of health, education, legal aid, job services, and women's services, and lists important information like hours, location, translation services, insurance requirements, all translated into key languages for refugees like Arabic, French, and Spanish. So far, we're live in Istanbul and California with more locations like Cairo, and actually right here in Westchester County coming soon. We also recently launched a campaign called I Am More, where we spotlight refugees and tell the stories of their successes, goals, and passions in hopes of humanizing them and showing the world that they're more than displaced people. The goal of Urban Refuge is to help refugees feel more comfortable in their new homes and help them access safe aid easily, ultimately helping to create greater stability in refugee host cities and making it easier for governments and nonprofits on the ground to reach the people that they're trying to help. Urban Refuge was founded by a team of all-female college students, and the team that runs it today is almost exclusively young women. I think we're really a testament to why young people need to be at the table for conversations about sustainable development as we are today. Young people are really pushing the world towards sustainability, and the brands that we buy, the causes we fight for on social media and on the streets, the companies we choose to give our talents to even. For me personally, a company's philanthropic identity is something that really plays a role in how I will support them. And that's why I work as an analyst at MasterCard, actually, a company that invests in financial inclusion, STEM education for girls, environmental protection, and more. Private partnerships are a huge part of building strong institutions, and that when they put their minds and money to it, they can actually have a huge impact when it comes to fostering peace, justice, and sustainability in the parts of the world that need it most. And just to close quickly, in 2014, I was actually interning with the United Nations Association for the first time, and I filled out the World I Want 2030 survey that some of you may be familiar with that helped to eventually form what became the SDGs. I know we're not at zero poverty or total gender parity or the other goals just yet, but with energy like this from all of you in the room with us here today, I know that we are on the right track. So thank you and happy 75th birthday to the United Nations. With that, I'm very excited to now pass it over to Shane Osenloye, another incredible young activist, to tell us about his work.
Thank you to the good folks at the UN Westchester chapter for inviting all of us to speak today.
We founded Urban Legacy to help Black people build wealth and close the racially motivated wealth gap through economic justice. We provide STEM training, entrepreneurship coaching, and other wealth-generating activities. The UN Sustainable Development Goals are a great framework to explain our programs and benefits. Black Americans traditionally seek peace and justice through the political process, but government officials prioritize taxpayers and employers until election years, and the school-to-prison pipeline is self-explanatory. Bringing Black youth directly to market is economic justice that prepares them to be property-owning taxpayers and employers, while disrupting inequity from well-meaning but outdated institutions that make poverty cyclical and institutionalize racism. Urban Legacy partnered with the STEM Alliance of Larchmont Mamaroneck, providing the Girls Do Tech Camp for Black girls in 5th through 9th grades to learn web design. We simultaneously provided STEM and entrepreneurship training in our very first program. Such programs foster inclusion, giving Black youth the STEM skills necessary to transact business, participate in the digital economy, and own the fruits of their labor. Effectiveness and accountability require presenting tangible outcomes. Immediately after our camp, 4 of our first 12 participants disclosed that they started their own e-commerce stores. So we know our programs introduced young Black entrepreneurs directly into the digital economy. Right now, we welcome the families of Black students to register for our co-ed web design training camp on November 16th, which can be found at urbanlegacy.org. A global reach is our goal. Most emerging markets are in Africa, while China and India's growing middle classes are evolving away from manufacturing. We hope to reestablish relationships between Africans and the global diaspora by encouraging trade partnerships. Prioritizing technology already gives Urban Legacy a national scale. We've had participants from as far away as Michigan and Massachusetts. We want to eliminate the wealth gap by helping Black America create an emerging market right here at home. Amassing wealth requires years of consistency, and Urban Legacy is working towards sustainability. We need support to reach our current goal to roll out a year-round, STEM-powered entrepreneurship program that includes opportunity youth, young adults ages 16 to 25 who are unemployed and unenrolled in academia. We welcome grant writers, donors, educators, volunteers, and professional help from anyone who supports increasing Black wealth. Please contact me to learn more about fostering equity with Urban Legacy, and thank you all for joining us today. At this time, I'd like to pass the mic to an emerging human rights activist, Harshita Shet.
Hello, everyone. I'm Harshita, and I'll be presenting my campaign flash drive today. So my campaign is called Feminine Dignity, and it's Feminine Hygiene Products Awareness. Next. The motives behind my drive/campaign go hand in hand with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Article 12, everyone has the right to privacy. And Article 22, everyone has the right to Social Security and to the realization of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for dignity. Next. Why do we need awareness for feminine hygiene products, you may ask? The way that you think of food and water being a basic necessity, feminine hygiene products are just as important whether you realize it or not. More than 250 million girls lack access to affordable feminine hygiene products, and 26.4 million people cannot afford it. Students are forced to miss school, women are forced to miss work, they drop out of school, and they don't have any other option. It goes on not locally, but globally, in refugee camps, everywhere. Next slide. Those who are impacted tend to be homeless or in poverty, and in correction facilities, they're not provided with feminine hygiene products. In refugee camps, they don't even have any. And women who are rescued from human trafficking and stay in shelters also do not have access to feminine hygiene products. Next. So far, we started our campaign at the India Center of Westchester. We've expanded into the town of Greenberg and now the United Nations. So far, we've collected over 10,000, which is now around 12,000, and we've donated those feminine hygiene products to My Sister's Place and Children's Village. Next. We need to create awareness around the community, not just locally, but globally, as I mentioned before, into refugee camps and even further around the world. Women and young girls should not have to deal with this mental burden and physical burden due to lack of this necessity. Next slide. We need donors, sponsors, and we're open to anything just to help for this important cause. Next. I would like to thank the UNA Westchester for giving me this amazing opportunity to share my thoughts. And I would like to thank everyone who supported me throughout the process. Thank you all. And now I'd like to pass it over to another amazing activist, Anusha Vaish.
How can you support Goal 2, Zero Hunger UN Sustainability Program? Well, I am here to present how insects can solve world hunger. My name is Anusha Vaish. I'm a 10-year-old Westchester resident. My journey began when I was in the 2nd grade after I did a research project on insects. After doing this project, I got curious. I wanted to learn more, like how do insects survive, breed, feed, and protect themselves. In my research, I learned that worldwide, there are efforts to saving vertebrates like tigers and whales, though majority of nature are insects and invertebrates. Also, insect species are on a 41% decline. I was shocked and I wanted to do something. I created my website, saveinsects.com, to create awareness around insects. In the 3 years since I started my journey, I have gained substantial knowledge and shared that knowledge on many platforms, including the Westchester Board of Legislators and the American Museum of Natural History. Since I've been to so many platforms, I have come across many people as well. What I share with these people are the benefits of saving insects and why I am doing so. Two of the benefits is that number one, as most people know, insects are one of the main pollinators. The more little critters they are, the more farmers are benefited. Same thing applies for the trash collectors. Insects are scavengers, so dead animals and leaves will be eaten away. The third benefit is that already 4,000 different species of insects are being eaten worldwide, and in 120 countries around the world, insects are a normal food. Insects can be a whole new food source. Now, what are the benefits of eating insects? Well, for a starter, insects are a very high protein source. Also, they need less food and water. An example is that with 20 pounds of grass, you can produce 2 pounds of beef, 6 pounds of pork, and 10 pounds of chicken, but also 20 pounds of locusts with 6 generations in a year. Now think of all the feats you can do with insects. As you can see, insects are truly amazing animals, and I want to call out for you to support in my initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your contributions you are making to our society. Today, we heard about global goals and the importance of individual actions towards making progress for future generations on our planet, also in Westchester County. So please don't leave us after the program, because there will be a general discussion where you can ask questions to some of our youth panelists and even make connections with them to streamline their programs and initiatives into your own respective local communities. So at this time, I will transition and give the floor to Dr. Brenda Smith, my fellow member of the United Nations Association of Westchester Board of Directors and our Chair of Partnerships. Dr. Smith, the floor is yours.
thank you very, very much. Marcia Brewster, our vice chair, is going to join me in this presentation. To our distinguished president. We are presenting him with the 75th Anniversary Leadership Award. I wonder if you can see it. It is so beautiful. I was thinking about keeping it, but my name is not on it. So I will have to make certain that Mr. Yana Edwards, Yana Edwards receives his award. And the award again reads, UNA USA Westchester chapter is honored to present the United Nations 75th Anniversary Leadership Award to J. Johanna Edwards, October 24th, 2020. All right, President Edwards, before you accept this beautiful, beautiful award, I would like to have Monty, your son, make a few remarks. Monty, are you there?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely, absolutely. I just wanted to say that this has been a wonderful program, and Dad, we're so proud of you, and I mean, this is just amazing. We know you've loved what the United Nations has stood for, you know, our whole lives. On behalf of me and my sister Maisha and the rest of the family, and my mom, God rest her soul. I mean, the SDGs and the good life goals and peace and women and girl empowerment, these are things that my dad has always stood for at his core his whole life, at least in our lifetime. So we just want to thank the United Nations of Westchester for bestowing this award upon our dad, who we're so proud of.
Thank you so very much, Monty. Mr. President, let me ask the Vice President if she has anything.
I would just like to add that the reason we are bestowing this award on our president, Yana Edwards, is because of exemplary leadership under very difficult conditions, a difficult transitional period from the time I was president, and his dedication to the UN and to the resolutions for CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which we're trying to get through the New York State Legislature, and his kind and compassionate management style. We appreciate you so much, Yana. Thank you for everything.
No, I want to thank the board for this honor, but I honor you as board members who have become family to me over this year of my trials and tribulations. I wish that this award was being presented to the board in general and to the program committee in particular. I humbly accept. I am honored to represent you as your UNA USA Westchester chapter president. But I think it's the board. I have a fantastic board, as those who are on this call, as they can see that it's an amazing what a program that was put together for you. So we need you to join us. Become a part of this humanitarian effort to save our world and to save our communities for the future of our children and our children's children. In closing, let us commit to cooperation and collaboration, to working peacefully but forcefully for a better world and for our country and community. Thank you to the attendees, the panelists, board, and all who work tirelessly behind the scenes to make today a success. Please remember that an optional discussion, networking session with our panelists will immediately follow the program. Thank you again. Those who are on this call that are dignitaries, I'd like to thank you, our Global Compact representatives, Olego Bay, Makinwa, forgive me for pronouncing your name wrong, my mayor, our mayor, Sean Patterson Howard, Shelley Myers, who's been supporting us, that's UNA, for many years. The Honorable Lauren Benny Roberts, thank you for being on. Damon McKewer, Damon Mayer, he's a county legislator. I wrote this out and I can't even read my own writing. And Deveron, who's behind the scenes, way behind the scenes, coordinating everything. Thank you all. and don't forget to join. I'm asking Deveron to put the screen signs up now to show you how to join us. Go onto our website. We have a fantastic website, and all of these things that are important to us and to you, join us to make it a better world. Thank you so much. Before, I just saw Marsha's face. Marsha, she's considered our general. She is our immediate past president, and she is, I want to share this honor with her, okay? So if I can cut this award in half, or when we get our own house, let's put all these awards up, because it's not me, it's we, all right? God bless you all, and have a great, great evening.
Wonderful. Well spoken, Joanna.
Wonderful, wonderful. Don't have the award yet, Mr. President. I may not give it to you and Marsha.
It's okay. I'm sharing it with it all.
So beautiful.
Oh, wonderful, well deserved.
Now I think Dan will lead off the discussion session. Daniel, are you there?
I'm here, Marsha. Colleen actually is going to lead off with the first question. We were monitoring the chat as the questions were coming in.
Yes,
Great.
Hello, everybody. That was a great presentation, and we're so glad for Yana to get that tribute and that award. So well deserved. We have a great question in the chat box from Diane Hemmel to Ambassador Okelo. Here's her question. In his remarks, the ambassador used the phrase perceived or real injustice. How can one address perception, which sometimes seems to be more important than fact? Ambassador?
Not easy.
Hello?
Yes, hello?
Okay. Yeah, it's not an easy question, because it's not easy to distinguish perception with reality. In actual fact, perception is the reality. Whenever you perceive an injustice, that is real to you, and you should treat it as real. And that's the way it should be approached. You find that many of the conflicts arise not so much because objectively there is an injustice, not necessarily objectively there's an injustice, but more because the aggrieved person perceives that there is an injustice and he acts on that basis. So I think it is always good as a practical matter to assume that what a person perceives is exactly the reality for them, and act accordingly. It is not a very easy question to answer, but you just have to be practical about these things.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And I have a question. We also had the opportunity to receive questions by email as people were registering for the event. So this one, Nicole and Brenda, I think it's particularly pertinent given Kaya's notes, Brenda, that you read. There's a couple of quotes here, or a couple of factoids. 38% of all New York households earning $25,000 or less have no high-speed internet, and 20% of households in New York metro areas don't have high-speed internet, nearly 750,000 students. So the question that came in is, do you think leaders in our country can make the commitment to invest that Kaya mentioned? And if so, what steps are needed to be taken to raise funds and support for that widespread investment in education?
It's a great question. Brenda, do you want to speak to that, or would you like me to?
I will jump in, Nicole, so go ahead.
Okay, so I have given this a little bit of thought, and I believe that our leaders can. The question is, will they? And what could we do to help them in their thinking? And I think it goes to your local community getting involved when there's a school vote on the budget. When you have a voice, if you are a parent in a school district, writing a note, an email, or a letter to your superintendent and just making some noise. Certainly, if you are someone who has the ability to donate funding for programs to help kids get access to technology. That's amazing and wonderful, but I do think that the community bears some responsibility to speak out and say, yes, we want to approve a budget that has more money allocated for technology.
Yes, absolutely. I do agree. And as Kaya said, there must be partnerships. You must work together. I have a bad reputation, and I'm going to share that. I think it's a good reputation, but others may look at it as a bad reputation sometimes because I'm always asking. And you know what? I go to certain groups, we're very much involved in the community, and they come through, but particularly when it's for children and youth. So you have to ask, you have to be an activist. And there are a number of organizations who have donated money, have given computers, if you will, and equipment. As a matter of fact, my husband belongs to an organization. It's a fraternity. I'm just going to say it's a fraternity. But these individuals do, in fact, give to schools, various schools in their communities. And you have to let people know that you need it. I remember when there was the defibrillator, and we had to have one in each of our in our schools, and when young people played football or any sports activities. And I said, where in the world am I going to get $79,000? I don't have $79,000. Well, I went to my legislator, and before I knew it, I had the money that I needed. So again, it's there, and there are people who are willing to do that. Dan, I'm sorry, I've gone all around the barn, and I'll get back there. I'm finished now, but you just have, and Nicole, you really hit it on the head. There, you must let people know what the needs are, and they will respond. I know that for a fact.
That's great, and that's hopeful, Nicole and Dr. Smith. Thanks so much. Paul, over to you for a question to your panel.
Thank you, Dan. So our first question for our youth panel is for Raina. And the question is, Raina, what kind of a world do you imagine following the successful implementation of your work?
That's a good question, Paul. So speaking on this SDG in general, I mean, I hope that we'll have a world where all around the world, we're no longer discussing whether the SDGs, including refugee rights, should be priorities, but actually actively discussing how we can address them and actively addressing them. In terms of urban refuge, I wish I could say that we'll have a world without refugees, but as climate change and conflicts grow, the reality is that people are continuing to be displaced. But I hope that our organization will be active around the world to make the lives of those people a bit easier and make the transition of migrating smoother, both for the migrants themselves and for the governments that are actually accepting them and the nonprofits and agencies that are there working to serve them. To go even a step further, in the ideal world of urban refuge, we would wear down that stigma around refugees to make that transition even just a bit smoother. And they'll no longer be treated with this alienation that we see a lot of today all over the world, but rather with the respect that they really deserve. And I expect that we as citizens, and especially young people coming out of this panel, I hope and expect that we'll be holding our governments and international institutions and also our businesses accountable for having that stake in the SDGs and ensuring that we all are intentional in prioritizing the SDGs, regardless of the work we're doing.
Great, thank you so much, Raina. I guess I can ask a second question for you panelists. I do have a couple with me. So our next question will be for you, Anusha. The question is, what can the United Nations do to inspire and support more fifth graders like yourself to become leaders on global issues?
Well, some things that I know are that a lot of young people are scared of insects, and what I like to share is that only a couple insects are not harmful, and most of them are mostly beneficial. Now, things that the UN could do to inspire more fifth graders are that they could show them and promote them more problems that are more related to them, and they will probably become engaged. Like how I was so related to insects, and I really needed to do something, so I made my website. And yes, I saw the question. A lot of older people are also scared of insects.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I guess the floor will be now back to you, Colleen.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate that. We have a great question in the chat box for Kristen from Ambassador Bob. So I'll read that to everybody. In terms of implementation of various SDGs, where do we see developing countries as compared to developed ones? Are there ways in which they can be assisted to move forward? Kristen?
Yes, well, it's a broad question, but the fact of the matter is that the SDGs were partly designed for countries other than the developed countries, although now we recognize that the UN has a role to play, even in motivating people in the United States and Europe. But I think that there are efforts being made by the UN Development Program to monitor in developing world the progress against the SDGs. And in doing so, they can identify the areas where there's the greatest need. And so the UN itself will be putting resources into promoting the SDGs in those areas that are lagging behind. I think that's basically the answer. I think in the developed world, in Europe, in the United States, in Canada, we have a responsibility to take these things seriously. And for example, the poverty rate in the United States is going up dramatically because of this pandemic. And we're going to have a lot of work to do in the United States to reduce poverty that is being created by the pandemic. So there are now, the pandemic itself is creating a worldwide challenge on many of these SDGs.
I have a question that came in the chat, and it's from Robert. It's for you, Ambassador Okelo. And it's really asking essentially for you to opine on the truth and reconciliation process. So for example, with the spirit of empathy and humility and getting out of our overly cutthroat competition modes of thinking and behavior. What's your position on that, if you will? And is there an opportunity for the UN to shift more in that direction?
That's a very good question, because the truth and reconciliation exercise is very cathartic. It gives opportunity for people who have been aggrieved or who have been oppressed during a period of hostility to come out and throw out their grievance and have it dealt with. Because suppressed grievances don't go away. They will emerge in one form or another in forms of violence and reactions, etc. So I fully support the idea of using a reconciliation commission as a part of a conflict resolution. And that has been done in many parts of the world. In Sierra Leone, after I left, I understand that was done. In South Africa, it was done in a very successful manner. And I understand also in Rwanda. Part of the reasons why Rwanda is quite stable now and progressing very well is because the president just came forward and tried to bring the parties to the conflict together, face to face, and try to throw out their grievances together and deal with it. And it has worked very well. So I really fully support that.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And, you know, there's been a few questions that I've noticed have come into the chat, and it's asking about how can we increase the information around SDGs to middle and high school students in particular. So let me just answer that with a quick question, and then I'll turn it back over to Paul. There are a couple of resources that are remarkable. If you go to the hashtag on Twitter, Teach SDGs, that's one. If you Google world's largest lesson, it's remarkable. There are so many pre-made lesson plans, all geared toward promoting and teaching the SDGs. And lastly, there's an organization called the Creative Visions Foundation, which has been a friend of UNA Westchester for some time. And they have a signature program called Rock Your World, rock-your-world.org. And that curriculum teaches the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to middle and high school students, and then gives them the tools with which to become agents of positive social change. They have recently been incorporating environmental sustainability and environmental SDGs into that curriculum. And we're fortunate to have on the board of UNA Westchester, Tricia Baldes, who is an educator in the Somers area, and she's one of the architects of that program. So there's some really good resources there for you to check out for teaching students about the SDGs. And with that, let me go back over to Paul for a question for your panel.
Thank you, Dan. Next question I have is for Shane Osiloye. And the question is, Shane, what obstacles do you believe must be overcome to upscale your work in economic justice?
The obstacles that I need to overcome, some believe that it's reach and scalability, which are actually not much of a problem because of the impact of technology on our world. Our number one problem or hurdle or obstacle is access to the funding necessary to amass the resources we need to make a valuable impact. And it's not that the resources aren't there or that they're reappropriated because of COVID or something like that. A lot of traditional foundations and government institutions will usually prioritize nonprofits and other people in the social space that have been there for decades, who don't quite honestly have very innovative thinking, and they're doing things in a way or for the economy of the 1980s as opposed to the 2020s. So those of us who are technologically literate and savvy, who need the resources to actually make our programs scalable, usually our programs aren't looked at unless they're several years old and already somehow it's the chicken and the egg scenario. And that's a very serious problem because even from our first program, we weren't expecting to get anything near national reach. I wasn't expecting to get little girls from like Michigan and Arizona asking me if they could be a part of the program, but we did. So even with almost no resources bootstrapping our program, we were able to create reach. So imagine if we have the resources to actually make a strategic impact.
Thank you so much, Shane. I see one question that we received from Cyril Singh that I'll quickly answer before I give the floor back to you, Colleen. It is, how can the UN assist in developing grassroots climate change, environmental education for youth from pre-K to college to help our global climate and environmental crisis? And the answer that I could propose is by overall serving as a forum for the marketplace of ideas of what people are doing within the climate space. I'm a member of the UN Environmental Programs Major Group on Children and Youth, where we have an extensive email list where I'm constantly getting emails from people all over the world and things that they're working on in the environment. And what I can do is, Cyril, I could connect you to that email chain, get you into our network, and you can hear about projects that other people are doing. You know, we have people that are like in Senegal that are working on that are doing projects in up recycling of clothing. We have people in Alaska that are kind of fighting against it, and connecting with local governments to fight against the privatizing water supplies that are happening, because you have waters being privatized in Alaska, and also, we have things, obviously in New York, we have issues that we're dealing with the fossil fuel networks, but it's more about connecting with people. And I guess I was just given a notice to mention that I participated in the United Nations inaugural Youth Climate Summit, and it helped me connect with people all over the world. So, you know, it's really important that in the climate space, you know, we don't have the luxury of time. You know, climate change is, it's something that we don't really have a lot of time. We have to really act now. So it's really important that you be very efficient and not reinvent the wheel with what you're doing. If anything, you should be innovative to make sure that it connects with local communities. So I guess now the floor is yours, Colleen, and Cyril, I will connect you with the UN Environmental Programs Major Group on Children and Youth.
Paul, before Colleen jumps in, I just wanted to mention to the other faculty who are here, this wasn't mentioned yet, the United Nations has a great program called UN Academic Impact, and you can find it at un.org. And it will connect faculty institution to institution on all of the areas of the SDGs. The UN Academic Impact might be useful for some of the teachers as well.
Thank you.
Also, well, colleague, I just added one more thing too, is that climate change, Surreal Singh, is going to be one of our topics for our inaugural Model United Nations conference in 2021. So I'll send you information on the Model UN as well, and I'll share it in the chat for everyone as well too. So it'll be good for you to be part of that conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul and Patrick. I have an email question for Nicole and Brenda. I also wanted to note that in New Rochelle, the library and the Library Foundation has raised money to purchase hotspots for families that do not have internet access. So it's something to keep in mind that we can all locally work together to make an impact. Nicole and Brenda, the question is, how will students, particularly those who are already challenged by life circumstances, make up for the lost instructional time caused by the pandemic? Will the gap between the successful and the struggling learners widen?
Brenda, would you like to go first, or should I jump in? Okay, I'll take it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so we know that young people are resilient, and we know that there's probably more we could be doing as educators to help them build their resilience, especially in this time. I think from what I've been reading on the Save Our Future white paper, there are going to be some children who may have catastrophic losses to their educational trajectories, right, over this time, unless more funding is brought to them. So we're on track, I think, internationally to have a lot of difficulty for young people, especially vulnerable groups like refugees, in some countries, girls, and certainly kids who struggle with any kind of physical or learning disability. This is a really difficult moment. Usually the young ones do the best, but the primary years, I think, is a really difficult time to do remote instruction. So all over the world, where you have kindergartners and first graders trying to learn how to read and learn their basic math skills through a Zoom meeting like this one, you can imagine that's really difficult. So I think there are going to be gaps, and I think everyone should do their utmost to help prevent that from happening. But I think it's inevitable that there will be some. I'm hoping that some of the innovations and the collaborations that are happening will help to mitigate that. And also that people will really rethink education in this time, that maybe what we're going to see is a renaissance and more interdisciplinary education and more hands-on education and more education outside of the traditional school year model. Like maybe if, let's say in the summer we had a vaccine and people could get back together, maybe there are more kinds of learning programs that aren't just everybody sit inside a building for summer school, but let's mix up the getting kids outside and active and then also teaching them things along the way. I think you could combine sports and physics, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. I just I noticed that our guest from the UN Global Compact provided some great links in the chat, and I want to make sure I point them out to folks. One is for the UN Principles for Responsible Management Education, which really is a way to apply and integrate the SDGs and more into business school curricula and business school activities. The other is PRIME, which is Principle for Responsible Investment, which is really addressing the investment community, which has been a tremendous change agent in the last 5 years or so, moving the needle forward in terms of companies embracing the SDGs. And then lastly, the Global Compact itself is one that is now nearly 12,000 companies strong. And those companies are, the CEO of each company has to make a commitment and endorse the principles of the Global Compact. So these are authentic, legitimate companies that are interested in working with the UN and other players to move the needle forward for societal good. So make sure you check out those links that are in the chat. And I have one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Paul because I think we're coming to an end. This is again for you, Ambassador Okelo. And perhaps it's something to end on a bit of an optimistic note. I hope so. The question says that our focus today is on SDG 16, all about peace, justice, and strong institutions. We have about a decade to go to reach those global goals. Are you optimistic?
Hello? Oh, yes, I'm very optimistic. Optimistic because the very fact that we are feeling the effects of this lack of development and the problems of economic degradation and the environment, etc. This is not the kind of natural environment in which human beings would like to live. This is something we would like to move away from. And when we set goals and we set up institutions, it's because we are pushing ourselves to get away from this kind of a situation. And therefore, we are being moved by a vision of hope that we will achieve what we are aiming at. So I'm full of hope that all will be well in the next decade.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And when we talk about hope and an optimistic path forward, I think everyone has to agree that the panel on youth that Paul was kind enough to moderate with all of the panelists is absolutely reason for hope. So let me pass it over to you, Paul, for probably the closing question or comment.
Dan,
No problem.
oh, Dan and Paul, please forgive me. I was on mute, and when the previous question, and Nicole did in fact respond to that, I was working my mouth, but nothing was coming out. And then I realized that I was, on mute. But Nicole is absolutely right. There are going to be gaps. And it's my understanding that there are groups like Neighbors That Care. They have offered, and they have teachers, but school districts now and superintendents, I wish we had a superintendent on to address this, but what's going to happen, I feel in certain districts, and in particular this district, they are going to look at those gaps. There's going to have to be some testing because a number of young people will be left behind. So Nicole, you really picked that up nicely, and thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Smith. So I'll ask one last question before I hand it over to Colleen to close up. And the question I have is for Harshita. And the question I have for you, Harshita, is how can the United Nations support your work in communities that lack an infrastructure to provide resources in feminine hygiene?
So the United Nations as a whole is associated with and serves tons of communities globally. So with my theme of serving women and girls and preserving their dignity, it goes hand in hand with human rights. The United Nations can assist me to connect me with international organizations who need support. And together we can preserve feminine dignity.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. So I guess next it's on Colleen. The floor is yours.
Yes, okay, great. Thank you, Paul. Yes, we have one final question, and that's for Kristen. Kristen, can you share an interesting anecdote from the Beijing conference that resonates today and connects to what we've been discussing today?
Well, there were many things that one could refer to, but I would like just to highlight the speech that Hillary Clinton gave to the plenary of the conference when she spoke about all the negative things that women experience and called for them to end once and for all. Because you could see in the room where all the representatives were sitting that this just took their breath away. And when she finished talking, there was a kind of silence, and we all sort of wondered, what's that all about? Well, it was the interpreters were finishing her statement, so people were listening very, very, very carefully. And after a short delay, the room burst open with excitement, enthusiasm. People were on their feet, they were clapping. She really did a wonderful thing in her speech at the conference.
Yeah. Thank you, Kristen. I've seen video of that speech. It seemed really exciting.
It was very exciting, very, very exciting, and sort of unexpected.
Wonderful. All right, I'll pass this on to Iana or Marcia or Dan. Any one of you want to have closing remarks?
I'm happy to close it out. Thank you all very much for your very active participation and a great question and answer period, a discussion session. I think we all appreciated it. This was our celebration of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. We looked at the past, and we looked at the present, and we looked at progress with all of our young people who were on the panel. And I tell you, there is hope. And a lot has been done over the past 75 years. We're looking forward to the next 25, and we hope we can involve all of you, all of our participants, all of our partners in the work towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you all. And please send us an email if you have any more questions. It's unawestchester@gmail.com.